Thank you very much for the Caresoft team and for those of you across the DIB and your respective build depths. I'm Steven. Andrew, you want to come off and say hey real quick?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Steven. Andrew Ventresca here. I'm an Azure specialist that supports Department of the Navy and support this series we put on speed dating. And just, super excited to have Carroll on. I know he'll give a bit of an intro, but, the partnership we have with CloudFit and the work they're doing in the Innovation Landing Zone has just been really cool to see and looking forward to today's presentation. I'll be monitoring the chat, so feel free to fire away and make this interactive. So thanks, everybody.
Fantastic. All right, so what you'll see here is you'll see that there's a couple times that we've asked to engage with the excuse me, with the chat here. There's going to be some questions that folks have. Oh, let me go back here. So it's not just Andrew and myself that are on the Microsoft Data and AI team to support various folks across the mil depths and across the DoD. This is your data and AI team here at Microsoft, right? So these speed dating sessions that we've been doing since December of 2022, we've covered down on a bunch of different topics. We've heard you. So there's a bunch of folks that have had questions about, what are the differences between, SQL managed instance or Azure SQL, or, I've got this one workload that's on-prem that's supported, but we're looking at modernizing, the application interface, but we need to understand the backend database connectivity, or, what are some specific policies that, we have with respect to our, with our command. How can we enable that given what we're trying to accomplish? And so what we have here is we have a slew of folks that are kind of your first point of contact relative to your respective command. So my challenge to you would be, when we populate the chat here a little bit later on today, take your respective mil depth, take your company's interaction with that respective mil depth, and contact that somebody on this team. If you haven't talked to them yet already, then reach out to them, whether it be via email and over LinkedIn, something like that. That's a great way to engage with not just Microsoft, but engage with the team that's here. I had referenced that we've been doing this for some time. We're excited about the partnership that Carroll's going to be talking about with respect to CloudFit today. But we've talked about a lot of emerging technologies in these sessions before. We've talked about machine learning operations. What is an Azure design session? How can we take advantage of some of the cloud solution architect capability there at Microsoft, and coupled with your mission workload or your data workload that you need to cover down on? What other partners have we worked with in the past, or how can we leverage generative AI capabilities? There's some existing sessions that we've done before. Now, these sessions aren't meant for redistribution, right? So if you're joining in the crowd and you're in the press, or you're looking for additional context to write a piece or get some information that way, this is not meant for redistribution. So the legal disclaimer is it's meant for informational purposes. It's meant for the ideation of the art of the possible. It's also meant for folks that if they want to engage with Microsoft and talk about the art of the possible, or some of our partners, or how to best enable these workloads, that's what these sessions are for. All right. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce today's speaker, Carroll. You're welcome to come off mute and say hey if you can see him. He is that talking head there. He is the gentleman otherwise known as Carroll Moon. And without further ado, I tell people a little bit about CloudFit and what the heck that's got to do with an innovation landing zone. I'd love to hear about it.
Yes, sir. Thank you. First off, thank you for having me today, and thank you for everybody that's listening. So I'm Carroll Moon. We can go to the next slide. I'll just walk through this. It'll help introduce me and the company. I think I always like to go through this, not to sell our company, but to help you understand kind of all customers always want to know why we're qualified to have these discussions. And so, but I'm Carroll. I was at Microsoft for about 18 years. I was about 10 of us got to start a thing called MMS, or Microsoft Managed Services, back in 2001. I started there in 2000. And that turned into CCS, which turned into BPOS, which turned into Office 365. And honestly, really cool to get to help build and run that. started as the ops architect in that, and then ultimately ran it as from a engineering-based service management perspective for a long time. I was there about 18 years. In that journey too, a couple years into it, our GM, general manager, left and went to start Xbox Live. So we got to help build and run Xbox Live there up through, I think it was 1.4 million concurrent users, and then we handed off that headcount back and that work back. And as Azure started, we were really busy. BPOS was really exploding, and so we helped seed that team from an operational architect perspective and consulted with them. And so there at the top left, everybody that was critical to me in that journey at Microsoft is now with me at CloudFit. All of the right-hand men and women that were with me at Microsoft are here at CloudFit. So our top 10 execs are over 140 years together at Microsoft. We're headquartered in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is my hometown, and we're about 3 hours south of DC. We hire the right senior people wherever they're at. That's turned into about 32 states. At the top right is probably the thing that makes us most unique. We are a product company. We're called CloudFit Software because we have a platform called CloudFit Software. We don't sell it. It is part of, if we're doing managed services for you. So as a homeowner, you've got a couple of ways to mow your grass. You can do it yourself, or you can pay the high school kid down the street to mow it. And if you pay the high school kid, he's using your lawnmower and your gas. Or you can pay a service, and that service is going to bring their lawnmower and their weed eater to take care of things for you and to manage that outcome. That CloudFit is the outcome. We're the outcome people. We're not there to sell you a box of parts. We're not there to sell you the airplane. We're there to sell you your flight, first class flight to your destination. And so we bring our platform with us. It's accredited. We're running it in classified clouds on down. And it is the accredited suitcase for our intellectual property. So every customer gets the benefit of every other customer, whether that's how we are doing availability or cybersecurity monitoring, or how that's how we're deploying innovation landing zones or different applications. And so we're a product company. We're not a consulting company, even though we do quite a bit of consulting. If CloudFit consults with a customer, it should feel like Microsoft product group people are consulting with that customer. We're not legacy O&M. We don't do butts in seats. Nothing against that. That's just not us. Our job is to automate that operations and to enable the outcomes for pennies on the dollar. And again, it's all about outcomes. Bottom left, we are a DoD company, 100% U.S. citizen, 100% continental U.S. We're serving across all impact levels today. And most companies our size don't also intentionally serve commercial, but we do, and that is a strategic thing for us. We figure if we want to be innovative. Our largest commercial customer is Microsoft's product groups. So I always say I used to be Microsoft product groups. I still am. We've got teams of people doing work in core engineering for Office 365, M365, as well as Azure, including sovereign cloud work there. We do managed app dev, managed data and AI, managed services, and managed cybersecurity for Microsoft's product groups. So we figure if we can make them happy and be successful, we can make any other customer be happy. Smallest customer intentionally is 5 seats. Largest customer, obviously, the Department of Defense, even working with DISA there with, if you think about the commercial virtual remote environment, that DoD response to COVID, we were part of that with Microsoft and DISA. Highlighted there, we're one of Microsoft's top partners for defense and intelligence and have won awards with them 3 of the last 4 years. And then also last calendar year, it seems like we've been in 2024 forever, but last calendar year, we were part of the team that won the Military Health System Research Team of the Year. We're really proud of that and some of the work that we've been able to do with a couple other companies around the warfighter health aspects of things. Both from a physical health and mental health perspective. Most important to me personally, bottom right, we exist to fund 2 charities. So all this IT stuff is great, but in the bylaws of CloudFit, as we hit thresholds, it has to pay these 2 501c3s. KidFit is about hope and opportunity, using sports for kids. And JobFit is about hope and opportunity, using free IT training and paid internships for adults. So high school kids, college kids, and career changers. And so that's a little bit about CloudFit. So the background is that we are, a lot of us came from Microsoft. We've got people from all over various industries at this point. But if you think in terms of concentric circles, running Microsoft's cloud, building and running Microsoft's clouds was the center of the circle. the next circle is doing that, all the things that we learned, how to scale, how to eliminate cost, how to improve quality, how to improve cybersecurity. How do we do that for the customer's workload? So our mission really is we intend to run every mission critical workload for, I always say on the planet, but really it's beyond that because we're doing things in space at this point as well. So that's who we are in my background. So we can go to the next slide. Again, real brief on this slide. We are a DoD company. That makes us pretty good at cybersecurity and compliance, which also kind of feeds into what you'll learn about the ILZ or Innovation Landing Zone approach today. That makes us attractive to commercial. Commercial makes us be pretty good and pretty agile. That is attractive to the DoD. And at the center of that virtuous cycle sit other government entities, like we're doing a bunch in Fed Civ, we're doing quite a bit in state and local government, law enforcement, defense industrial base, and CMMC related customers. I think 8 of the 11 biggest DIBs are our customers. We're doing a bunch in the nuclear space, a lot in healthcare and so forth. And so all of that kind of culminates together. If we're looking for, people don't think about maybe DoD experience and healthcare experience and how that might help with a warfighter health initiative. That's why those things are important to us. It's specific experience, and then we can bring those past performances and capabilities to help innovate in the Department of Defense. So next slide. So really every entity has the same challenge, whether it's a commercial entity or DoD entity. You've got your existing portfolio, so n number of applications or workloads running on-prem today, lots of applications and lots of data. And the goal would be at some point to move it from left to right. How do you go to this new cloud hardened enclave and tenant? Really the question is, how do you set that up? You don't want to have to pay somebody to come figure out, how do I set up a hardened IL5 enclave or hardened IL6 enclave? You want somebody that's already done that. And thankfully, Microsoft has innovated there and packaged their experience in some free documentation, like the mission landing zone content that's out there. And that's a huge step forward. And then if you were to take the mission landing zone or the infrastructure as code that Microsoft built and layer onto that a concept of how do I use operations, how do I build and tag and enable resources so that I can innovate more quickly later and streamline things like the IA process and ATO process for the applications that are coming on. How do I tag things so that I can workload by workload or mission owner by mission owner be able to project and track financial operations, our cost versus what was projected down to the granular level. There's a lot of that from an operational model perspective that gets layered on if you're doing it the right way. And so Andrew, I'll count on you to monitor the chat for me and just interrupt me if I need to take any questions directly.
No, I got you, Carroll. I'm just dropping a couple links. I dropped the website for CloudFit and then some additional documentation on the Azure landing zone. So all good.
And I will say too, our website is intentionally underwhelming. We keep the work that we're doing pretty neat to know, just because of the spaces that we play in. So most of our business is, we're not doing a lot of sales, we're not doing a lot of marketing. Most of it is word of mouth. Customers have a good experience with us and they call the next customer, and we're really thankful for that. So, and OPSEC is really important. Yes,
Carroll. Hey, it's Stephen here. So this isn't in the chat, but it's related to a topic that we covered 2 months ago with respect to security and cloud relative to DoD workloads. And it's a general question that comes up in a lot of these preliminary discussions. And I wanted to ask you directly, probably going to be getting to it here, but when it comes to the innovation or using net new capabilities in cloud, how do you manage it came up, like I said, a couple months ago when we had a security specialist come on. How do you manage the application of net new innovative technology with respect to the security constraints associated with DoD workloads? How do you balance those two?
No, that's great. I think the key is you have to do both, and how you accomplish it is really, really important. And so I think about, all of us drive cars, and you can't go buy a you can customize your car after you buy it, but you're not going to go out to the Tesla app and you can only, you're picking a Model X and you're only getting an option of maybe 3 colors and 2 different interiors and 2 different motors, right? And you have to be able to think of that way. And so then your customization on top of that is on you. But in this model, what we're talking about is you would really be adding a new color or a new motor to that Tesla to be accepted. And so how do you innovate at the same time that you don't impact security or impact your ability to scale? And so really it's modularity is I believe the right answer. Experience tells me is the right answer. So to get the landing zone itself. Sorry, something just happened with the team. So I apologize for that. So really the modularity of getting the hub in place and the hub in place in such a way that it's thought through operationally long term. Not, okay, we've thought through and we get this hub in place and we've got it accredited, yay. You have to have already thought through the extensibility of that, not just from a technology perspective, but from an IA and cybersecurity perspective. So once you get that there, then it comes to the discussion of the application and what accreditation does it have? Does it have the opportunity to be tested in an enclave that has ring fence area for it, so it can't get in and can't get out? How can I do IL2 level testing, for example, in an accredited IL5 enclave? Well, if you hadn't thought through that up front and built the ATO for the enclave with that in mind, you're never going to be able to do it. And so really it's the modularity, looking at the applications and the enclave as separate, and to have thought through that in the enclave ATO to be able to compartmentalize different applications so that you've got a combination of agility for things that need to be tested and innovated, but then also to be able to go straight to production without a lot of headache later.
Fantastic. I appreciate that answer. And for those of you who are actually watching this on replay, whenever we share out the recording, we told you so. You got your answer there. So I know it comes up quite a bit. Carroll, thank you. Back to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Let's jump to the next slide. All right. So this just a sort of left to right diagram to ground you in what we're talking about in terms of the enclave. So everybody, including the DoD, you've got physical devices, you've got virtual devices, you've got mobile devices. There on those devices are applications. They connect in through direct VPN or through being on your local area network or through cloud VPNs or access points, cloud native access point, for example, in Air Force with Cloud One. And then there's Azure, and that's where we've got your identities, your authentication, your logging, the SIM, in this case, Sentinel, and then the enclave itself for those line of business apps. It's really, people think, well, it's not that big a deal. The enclave is absolutely key strategically to be able to do the innovation, to be able to move again from dev to test to staging to production seamlessly. And on that enclave are those line of business or mission applications. And then, so just grounding it, that, kind of in a rectangle there, pointing to that same safe, that's the enclave of the innovation landing zone. And separately, there's Office 365, all the way up through Office 365 Secret. CloudFit is heavy involved in everything from commercial Office 365 up through Office 365 Secret, including with DISA there. So, and then of course, even on top of Office 365, our custom workloads, mission apps, business apps, and so forth, whether it's everything from SharePoint web parts to Power Apps to applications within Teams, all of that is in scope. And so the same discussion we're having here about Azure and getting the enclave right so that you can innovate quickly and move from idea to production, thanks to the flexibility of the ILZ in Azure. The same discussion is really there around your tenant and tenancy in Office 365. That's another discussion for another day. And with this data discussion and AI discussion, obviously Copilot on that right-hand side with Office 365 is a big deal also. Next slide. Okay, we've got some pre-staged questions. Andrew and team, I'll wait here for a moment. I think there's a poll perhaps that's coming.
There it is. Kyla, go ahead and oh, there it is. comments from the peanut gallery. There are some pretty simplified responses here, plus some incorrect answers. And if you don't have the answer, just be patient, because Carol's going to be jumping into this here in just a sec. So, all right, back over to you, Carol.
Okay, great. I think we've got the answer here pre-staged for the ILZ. And if we jump to the next slide. So what is an ILZ? It's manage everything enclave or hub. So we've got some pictures coming up. Hub and spoke really is what I mean by that. So it's the hub that rapidly enables workloads to onboard or to be innovated for that matter, while taking advantage of the accreditation boundary of the hub. So if we get that enclave, that safe door that I had in the previous picture, if we get that right, it's going to enable everything else, all the spokes, to be able to move pretty quickly. And the fastest example we've got at the IL5 level so far is with an IL5 accredited landing zone. Mission owner said go, and 9 business days later, we were ready to enable the warfighter at the edge with edge devices that weren't part of the boundary before, and applications that were previously accredited but not part of the boundary before, to be able to do that within 9 business days to enable an exercise for the benefit of the warfighter. So it's doable. And usually things in DoD don't go that fast. And if they do go that fast, there are a lot of waivers and people putting their careers on the line to get it. In this case, there wasn't that because of how the ILZs are structured. Next slide. Okay, so enclaves and impact level. So for every customer, so if I'm a DoD command, I likely am going to, speaking on Azure at this point, I'm likely going to have multiple enclaves based on my mission requirements. Some commands do most of their work in SIPR, and so they start with a Azure Secret enclave or an ILZ 6 in that case, Innovation Landing Zone 6 for IL6. Other commands are doing a lot on TS, and so in that case, the first enclave might be an ILZ TS for at the TS level. Others are IL5, others are IL4, others are IL2. Sometimes commercial, especially with Gen AI and publicly available data. We're seeing a lot of that. If you are not playing with generative AI in commercial today, you should be. And then usually for a particular customer, we put X's in multiple cells. So in that customer 1 column, say command 1, they may need we see often commercial plus IL5 plus secret, or commercial plus IL5 plus top secret. And then the beauty for us is we've done it so much over the years, both helping Microsoft for 20 years while I was there with their sovereign clouds, and then as CloudFit, helping them, Microsoft back in Microsoft all along with their sovereign clouds, and then for customers all these years using sovereign clouds and enabling it. We've learned a lot. So really it's customer 1 through customer N. And if you look at it, that just becomes a road. This is how we do and accredit commercial enclaves. This is how we do or accredit IL5 enclaves. This is how we do or accredit secret enclaves to be able to enable that forethought. Like forethought, Oscar Wilde said, experience is simply the name that we give our mistakes. And so I've been doing this a long time. Like I said, I started at Microsoft July 3rd of 2000, made a lot of mistakes through that period. And so these innovation landing zones are built based on all that experience and the mistakes that we've made. And mistakes in this case is if we ever have, let's say, a customer 12, let's say, IL5 landing zone and a new requirement for an app, a spoke on that hub that takes longer than we want. Well, that's learning. That's a mistake. We learn from that. So then we update how we do ILZs for every customer that we're managing today and every future customer. So next slide.
Yeah, just real quick, Carol, as we're jumping into the next slide here. So you had answered the question earlier about as somebody's submitting an ATO package and they're doing dev, so to speak, in a lower tier environment before they deploy to a higher impact level. What happens as technology changes? So as commercial technology capabilities change, like a new large language model capability in commercial, taking a still image, adding movement capability coupled with some audio, that capability, was just announced over the last 24, 48 hours with a new large language model here on the commercial side. How does one apply the adoption of that technology in those different impact levels if they didn't account for it because it didn't exist? But how do you account for that?
Yeah, it's a couple of answers there. One is you always want to understand where your target data level is. So most of the development, most of the time, the code isn't classified. The data itself is. So you can dev low, promote high, and then integrate, bring the app to your data. So if your data is TS level and you're doing your development in commercial or IL2, you want to be thinking about and aware of, okay, there's this new, if you're doing good development planning, here are the scenarios and user stories that I'm enabling, here's the features that I'm going to use to do that. And then here's my backlog, here's the futures I want to get to in terms, never about the tech, it's about the capabilities that are going into that application. And so what's being developed in commercial or IL2 today for TS is going to be based on what I know is available feature-wise in TS tomorrow. And so I do that development, and ideally it's agile. Ideally, I'm doing a DevSecOps approach. So what comes out of the pipeline is accredited right into TS to be joined up with my data. And then as I'm thinking through my futures, I'm staying aware of the features coming from Microsoft. To your example with the audio and so forth. And I'm thinking about my feature backlog for my application, my other user stories and my scenarios, and then I marry those up. But I'm not doing it. I'm plugged in with Microsoft, right? The customer would be plugged in with Microsoft going, hey, when is that feature going to be available in TS so that I can develop it on IL2 or commercial and join it up with my data in TS? And that's how to do it. The other part of that is it is miraculous how far Microsoft product groups are along now with parity, meaning really how long does it take from something landing in commercial to then being available in Azure Gov IL2, then IL4, then IL5, then secret, then TS? It's never waiting on Microsoft at this point. It is miraculous how good the product groups have become at that. It really goes through the accreditation piece with DISA for I always say the big Azure ATOs, the PATOs for big Azure. So, and that process itself, I've been really impressed over the last 5 to 10 years, seeing how good and well Microsoft and DISA are working together to enable that. Really is fascinating. So there's two sides of that. There's one back to the features and how do I think about where my app's going to live to be joined with my data and what's available. And then secondly, knowing that engine with Microsoft and the DoD is picking up to be able to get these things accredited. Again, I don't see it weighed on Microsoft, the parity thing. So the commercial equals TS. I see it weighed on the accreditation piece, and that is continuing to speed up as well. Okay.
Fantastic. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And so let's take an IL5 example. Nipper is Nipper. We all know about Nipper, and then you've got Azure Gov. Now, the great thing about Azure Gov is it is accreditable at the IL2 level, at the IL4 level, and the IL5 level. And so the way that Azure Gov works is with private IP addresses, and then we can add with BCAPs and so forth, the opportunity to put direct Nipper IP addresses there. So it's shortly kind of two different boxes. There's Nipper all up with on-prem and everything else going on Nipper. Then there's Azure Gov where we join is with the BCAPs and Nipper level addresses at either the 2, 4, or 5 level. So next slide. So then what we're talking about within Azure Gov is accrediting these virtual boundaries is the best way to think about it, like a virtual data center in the cloud, no different than if I were walking in a data center on a particular DoD base. Sometimes those are going to be accredited at IL2, sometimes at IL4, and sometimes at IL5. In the Azure Gov instance, if I were doing these slides for IL6, I would be showing Azure Secret sitting directly on SIPR. If I were doing Azure TS, I would be talking about TS sitting on whatever top secret level network that I'm discussing for that day. And so this just should give you a mental framework for what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a virtual data center, virtual boundary for a particular entity, whether it's a command or a whole mill dep or whatever, to be able to do it in this way. Next slide. Question 2.
Poll question coming in hot. And just as a reminder, as you're filling out this poll question, there's a couple of links in the chat where you can actually submit a question. So as Carroll's going through some of these use cases, as the art of the possible starts to conjure up some type of ideation or some type of conversation that you've been having, and if you're going into PI planning, for instance, go ahead and fill those questions out. So those will come to us, whether or not Microsoft or Carahsoft is able to get back with you today. We'll try to get those questions answered. One, just because as general as we're trying to be here with this presentation, I know Carroll's chomping at the bit to tell you about some other things that are in motion that probably can't talk about today in specific detail. So just know that if you have a question, it's either already been addressed and has already been funded and or contracted and being worked on, or we can get to it at a later time. So poll questions, you can respond, and then back to you, Carroll.
Yeah, thank you. Let's jump to the answer, please. So why should you have an ILZ? I think lots of reasons. First, I want to just say not everything's not a nail, so everything doesn't need to be a hammer. So there are situations where you don't need an ILZ. You've got varying requirements for enclaves, and so I'm not saying the ILZ is the answer to the ILZ approach is the answer to everything. So I would rephrase that question actually is how, regardless of how a MilDep's doing their clouds today, why do they also need an ILZ or an environment, whether they call it ILZ or not, that has the features of an ILZ? And I'll just take these one by one. One is the ability to connect to appropriate networks as an extension of those networks, including high availability COOP and DDIL scenarios. So let's take the IL5 Nipper example. If from an ILZ perspective, a lot of cloud enclaves, not ILZ architecture and ATOs, you can't do ingress other than through jump boxes, or you can't do ingress other than through 443. And that would, if I've got a scenario, let's say my mission requirement is I want to put my app or workload in the cloud, but I have to, from a high availability perspective, if the cloud goes down, still function. Or it's unlikely that the cloud's going down. If my communication, the cloud goes down, I need to still function. So that means I need capacity on-prem that I'm doing high availability with. So that could be an Azure Stack device. It could be existing hardware in my data center. But if I don't have the ILZ type architecture where I can do stuff over ports that aren't 443 securely with the overhead of a VPN or whatever, then I'm going to have trouble executing on that high availability requirement. Same thing for continuity of operations in DDIL scenarios. So that's number one. Number two is the ability to adapt to identity and access management requirements. Not everybody uses the same domain. There's some commands themselves that have 10 or 20 domains or more in their world from an on-prem perspective. And the question is always, well, what domain do I put in the cloud? Which one do I extend? Or do I set up a net new for this cloud enclave? Do I set up a net new identity series that then I'm federating? And how does that work in the DoD, for example, with things like TFUD and to be able to make sure that I don't break those? So that's a really important thing that needs to be configurable. REL for foreign nationals and partners and Five Eyes and so forth to be able, how do you do that in the cloud? A lot of people think you can't. I'm here to tell you you can. And it's about getting the overlays correctly, or getting the overlays applied to the cloud correctly and be able to manage it at the app. How do you do that? A lot of mission requirements require that foreign nationals be able to use the applications as well. And then four, you don't want to have to build a package necessarily for every application. And goodness, what if I just want to test something in my enclave, not using operational data? Do I really have to go through a 6 to 12 month accreditation for this app that I don't know if I need or not, or that I don't know if it's going to work to enable me that way. And so we really need the ability for workloads to inherit the accreditation of the ILZ. And then any gray area accreditation for workloads should be have an easy button. And I've got a picture of that later. And then you got to build with a run state and ongoing optimization in mind. It's not so many times, like if you think about the life cycle of a cloud enclave, there's a, like if there's a whole line, there's a one single dot that is get it going. And so many people just focus on the dot of get it going. They're not thinking ahead to, or experience based, what are we going to do long term? What is this thing going to look like 5 years from now? How are we going to make the keeping the ATO up to date easy? How are we going to get it to where we're applying STIGs in an easy manner? And the thing is designed in such a way that we're cutting out that operational cost and headache and trip, stumble, fall kind of thing. So next slide. So hub and spoke, we've got the ILZ at the bottom. Again, using an ILZ IL5 example. We'll go bottom up here. Centralized VDMS, VDSS, so management system and security system. Accreditation for the scope of Azure services at that particular impact level. So, and including their patterns, almost like type level accreditation, but within the package to say, this is how we're going to handle ingress. This is how we're going to handle egress. And what are our options for ingress and egress based on the mission requirements of the workload. Same thing for identity and access management. Same thing for here's how we're going to easy button and go through approvals to rapidly update the PPSM, supports and protocols. I need this system in my enclave connecting to this partner. So if I'm doing something for the Army, how am I going to quickly connect to that similar system at the Air Force? That shouldn't take whole new ATI to ATO cycle. We should set things up with internal review boards and external review boards and so forth to be able to do that. Same thing with ConMon and ConOps. How do we extend those? Have we pre-thought through, here's all the types of applications we're going to enable so that what we accredit is configurable with known configurations, just like my Tesla ordering example. Next bullet, connect to other services on NIPR, other than reports other than 443. Sometimes database replication, Mongo replication may not be able to with my pipe do things in certain with the overhead of 443. And how do we do things like that securely? Same thing with identity. We talked about that. We also need to clearly take dependencies on Microsoft's Azure ATOs at that impact level. So back to Stephen's earlier question about that, I ended up talking about parity between sovereign clouds. Same thing happens here, right? We have to set the ATO for the ILZ up in such a way that says, all right, Microsoft's going to constantly be adding things to that big Azure ATO. I shouldn't have to go through a whole nother RMF update to be able to take advantage of that. So concepts like approved services list in our ILZ package that says, I do have to go through a change order with the AO, going through the ISM and SCON and ultimately with AO to go, I'm now including this AOAI API in scope, but it shouldn't be a whole new package you're having to go. It has to be extensible up front. Configuration enabling separate enrollments and billing accounts for seamless financial operations. It's one thing to set things up as a single enrollment and a single billing account, but what happens when one directorate now has a new mission requirement and they want to bring their own funding? So if let's just say the J6 has set this thing up and it's funded out of J6 budget, what happens when the J2 shows up with a mission requirement with some money and an app and they need to go in? Like, what are we nipping money around, or have we pre-thought through that requirement to say, hey, it's just a new enrollment and or billing account. You fit this scenario. This is how we're going to do that. This is how we're going to tag your resources. This is how we're going to report financials to be able to see that you're on budget over time. And then the same thing with rapid creation of sub areas and permissions. So all that has to be pre-thought through. Now, if we jump to the top, we've talked about the bottom. At the top is every workload should be accredited in its own right. So whether that's at a dev IL2 example, even in a ring-fenced IL2 part of this IL5 enclave, fine, that's how we do dev. Or if it's I'm accredited with an IATT at IL4 or 5, so I can join with real data at the FOUO or CUI level. but I'm not operational. And then ultimately with ATO. So every workload has its own path. A lot of times these workloads are already accredited on-prem. So how do I take that and not have to redo all of that entirety of an RMF package to be able to move this to I'm on IL5 on-prem? How do I rapidly go to IL5 in the cloud? The challenge always is the middle. It's that gray area. And so what we really want to do is take that the ILZ, if we do it the right way, takes that bottom line and moves it up. So really part of that ILZ should be handling that gray area because we pre-thought through those scenarios through experience. How do I handle a Mongo React Node.js application? How do I handle a containerized .NET application running on Linux connecting to Azure SQL on the back end and then making calls to the Azure AOAI APIs, right? Like that bottom line moves up. So things just become simple. The middle area is what always hangs people up. And so they got the ATO at the bottom, they got their ATO at the top. How do I move it to the cloud? It's that the extensibility at the bottom has to enable that middle to kind of go away. Next slide. So from a managed perspective, the way that we do it, other people maybe do it different ways. It's managed everything for that hub at the ILZ. And then as these workloads come on, there are options. So governance only is a really lightweight deal that allows us to be able to handhold the workload owners to be able to rapidly come onto the platform and to stay onto the platform without breaking our ATO. And then secondly, sometimes customers want us to onboard it and not break the ATO, but also manage it. Meaning, hey, I'm going to move Remedy to your cloud to this ILZ, and it's at the IL5 level. Carroll, I want you to be the guy that's in charge of those containers. And if they're down, you're getting them back up. You're helping me make sure I scale it correctly and so forth. And then maybe the customer is going to handle, the admin functions within Remedy. So we manage those workloads. And then the top tier, a lot of times customers will say, I've got an idea for an app, or I've got this legacy app on-prem that needs to be modernized or needs to be extended for AI or ML. Carroll, CloudFit, can you do that? And we do. So in the picture, really 3 levels. One is we monitor it and call you. So we're just governance only, and we're enabling you. I'm using monitoring because we all think about monitoring. Same thing could be with accreditation or so forth. But we're kind of doing lightweight governance only. We monitor it. We call you mission owner. Second tier is we monitor it and we call ourselves. And then the third tier is we built the code for you. And so all of those are options, and we do all of those for, even like I said earlier, we're doing all of that for Microsoft's product groups today. Sometimes we build the app, sometimes we just run the app, sometimes we're just doing managed cybersecurity for the apps. But everything we're doing here, we've been doing for decades. It just happens to be at different impact levels. So next slide.
Before we jump to the next slide, because the next slide is going to be the poll question for number 3, Carroll. Let's talk about the OPC or other people's code, because that's where there can be some sensitivity that for decision makers and folks who are technical users who are operating in that gray area that you said that sometimes folks can get stuck in. Let's talk real quick about adding a generative AI capability to an existing application. So can you cover that use case, not necessarily in detail, but just cover that use case real quick in terms of how CloudFit can help enable that?
Well, yeah, it always goes back to the roadmap for the app. So if you've got a feature or user story that you're enabling with a feature, either your existing code, your development team, regardless of whether it's a vendor or gov or military, they can build it. And if we're doing governance only, can talk through that with them or give them input to help enable them. Or in some cases, customers want us to just come alongside their dev team and help enable that. And when I say come alongside, sometimes that's through a program management perspective. Sometimes that's through an architectural perspective. Sometimes that's through actually helping come alongside and writing the code perspective. And so it really comes down to what are the scenarios that I think most applications, if we all take the time to think about the mission workloads that we're all accountable for today and think about how could generative AI help with that? Is there data that I have that would be helpful if I translated it? Is there data that I have that would be helpful if I summarized for people? Is there data that I wish I had that I'm not ingesting because it's not in English today? Or is there data that I wish I had, but it's in video or audio form today that I'm not ingesting. And so the way that CloudFit would enable that, or Microsoft for that matter, it doesn't have to be CloudFit or some other partner. It's coming once that ideation, we can help with the ideation, but then once a decision is made, we're going to add this feature, then we can advise, or we can do the work, or we can come alongside and do the work.
Tracking. Fantastic. I appreciate that. Kyle, I think we've got question number 3 coming up right here. Oh, I'm skipped ahead. There you go. Question 3.
All right, so number 3 there, what impact to the mission does enabling data engineering, analysts, and other stakeholders have on this approach? And so, again, every mission's got to answer this. The mission value for them of giving the right access, the right people need access to the right data to accomplish their mission. And that regardless of cloud, regardless of computers, the right warfighter needs the right access and the right data and the right everything to be able to execute on the mission. That's a fact and has always been a fact. So then, like, because of that, I would rephrase that question actually is if I had an ILZ, how's that going to enable the mission to leverage the right capabilities rapidly once a decision is made to enable those roles to do the work? So if an engineer or a developer has been given the task, a decision is made, go add this feature, or an analyst, go answer this question, or other stakeholders, the ILZ is going to help them go faster because the ILZ's job is to enable that, rapid, seamless, easy execution once a decision's made, because pre-work's already done. It's not like we just invented, again, the life cycle of that ILZ. The setting up of it is one dot in this entire time series. And so you have to design it. If we think back to that little matrix I had where customer 1 through customer N, there's a life cycle of experience there that every landing zone should be taken advantage of. And so the pre-work's already done if it's done right in anticipation of those mission requirements. We know we're going to see, mission applications that are using legacy.net that need to be modernized before an AO is going to agree to move them to the cloud. And really, they shouldn't have been running in IL5 in production already, but, no harm, no foul, but I'm not going to let you move it to the cloud until you fix it. Great, let's deal with that. Or how do we put that in a boundary in such a way that we can move it and then modernize it? So, and the managed ILZ should be able to rapidly onboard and enable for the long term. So how's that happen? The Azure AI, ML, and AOAI services and plumbing should be enabled at the hub layer. So part of that ILZ ATO should be all of the Azure features that are available today. And then as new features come from Microsoft and are credited at, again, this example using IL5, the ILZ ATO has to be able to be extensible to rapidly add that new feature for the benefit of the mission. Second bullet there, workloads can be built or extended to use that now. The AOAI using this example, or any other PaaS services for that matter, and the ILZ should make it seamless. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it's immediate. What it does mean is it's predictable, and it's quicker because it's predictable. My son's a high school quarterback, and great coaches have told him over the years, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And that's the discussion here, right? If we've got the roads paved and we're not just, bulldozering dirt paths through the woods, we need to pave the highways, and we need to think ahead which highways to pave. If that's been done, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. All right, that's it for that slide.
Fantastic, Carroll. So what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing that we are at the tail end of the presentation material. So what I like to talk about here, once we get to this point, not just every time we have a speed dating, but every time we have a guest speaker come in and provide some context and some clarity around how to enable this idea of a mission landing zone or an innovation landing zone, or how do you take the cloud adoption framework and take what was an existing workload on-prem and put it into the proper impact level? What are those next steps? So tell people here, we've got about 20 folks or so that are here with us today. Tell people, what are those next steps? Is it to simply contact you, or is it to contact Microsoft, Carahsoft? What are the next steps here?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to think through, to learn yourself. And so if you have interest in ILZs or landing zones or mission landing zones or whatever term you use, you should start to educate yourself. And so a simple search of Microsoft mission landing zone is going to get you started. As Stephen mentioned, there's the cloud adoption framework, there's MLZ mission landing zone. If you search for landing zone Azure DoD, you're going to find a lot of content that's going to help you educate yourself. So that to me would be step one. Step two is if you want to have a conversation about it, I would contact Microsoft. You had a whole list of people at the beginning of this presentation and pictures with it of all of your contacts, depending on where you work in the world. And those people will be happy to call you or talk to you. And then those people are going to engage me if they think CloudFit can help you achieve your mission more quickly or cheaper or faster than others. And you're always welcome to reach out to me as well directly. And so if you reach out to me, I'll respond 100% of the time, and I can add the right people. Doesn't mean that I'm going to answer every question, but I'll add the right people at CloudFit to engage you. And if you end up engaging us, then I'm going to turn around and likely, unless you ask me not to, bring in the right Microsoft person. So you could go to me and then we'll bring in Microsoft, or if you go to Microsoft, they'll bring in me and my team. So whichever way you want to go.
I appreciate that. So that list he's talking about just dropped in the chat here. So if you're trying to get in touch with somebody at Microsoft with respect to your MILDEP and or what your organization does, that list just dropped in the chat there. So those of you who are joining on a guest browser, or those of you who are joining in, I'm not going to throw them under the bus. I was gonna give the Navy a hard time just then, but I'm not going to. So those of you who are joining from a we'll call it a restricted environment, just jump over to the chat, grab Andrew's email, because as soon as you leave here, you lose it. So you're not going to have access to it again. So Andrew and Carroll both, I want to say thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time. Sometimes these are the possible discussions are exactly that. They're a discussion. However, the existing framework or the existing experience and frameworks that you've shared in some of these slides, Carroll, that they do a really good job of helping people who are going through either that planning or who are engaged in learning themselves and trying to take those existing workloads and bring them into the 21st century and hardening our capability at the same time. So I appreciate you. Any saved rounds before we jump, Carroll?
Thank you again for letting me join, and I look forward to helping you all as we go along. Thank you.
And just if I can, if your son's a quarterback and he's, if he's mobile, Nebraska is on the up and up. So for those of you who are college football fans, just keep an eye out there. So don't throw your keyboard at me if you're not a Husker fan, Carroll. You're in close to Blacksburg. So very good. I like it.
Yep.
I like it. Fantastic. All right, Andrew, anything that you got, any saved rounds coming from your neck of the woods there in the Navy?
No, all good. This is fantastic. Looking forward to the follow-up where we can share, talk some more detail and share some more specific examples. But this was such a great kind of level set and Kickstarter. So Carroll, as always, thank you, sir. And look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, so the suggestions that he had talked about, essentially we're going to be wrapped for today. So the suggestions that he had talked about in terms of educating yourself at the time that you want to, whether it's listening to a podcast, there's the Data Talk podcast that we put on, there is video content that we are making available. Again, it's not meant for redistribution. So the disclaimer that we like to put on there is this is for education and informational purposes only. So use it. The Data Talk podcast, the ongoing speed dating series. We're going to have another one coming up here in just a few weeks. So right at about a month from now. just know that when it comes to enabling some of these workloads, there's more context that's needed. There's more discussion that's needed. That's really the point of these informational products and the opportunities that we have to engage with you directly. So appreciate you all taking some time. Thank you to CareSoft for your help getting everybody here. For those of you who joined us, Vivek, Kyle, good to see you again. Appreciate you joining here. Excited to get things going there on the recruiting side for the U.S. Army, and everybody else. Anyway, excited to see y'all. Look forward to talking with you soon. Have a good rest of the day, Carroll. Enjoy the rest of the week. We'll see you. Thank you.
Carroll.
Thank you for joining.